I started carrying this so that when I walk across Center Street at night, they don't stop.
No.
They're really bad. Makes me a little nervous.
And
That's a good idea.
right there by the
Really?
Drive down on the corner of Main Street in the Oregon City Westland
I had it on the front of my jacket.
That's one dangerous intersection.
Just step out, looking down.
So I've looked the little plants that
Don't
you
even go in
planted.
there.
Oh,
Why didn't you water
I
them?
mean,
I have.
The soil on the top is completely
Oh,
dry.
probably because of the cold
I
weather.
stuck my finger
Yeah,
in
I'm
it,
driving
and
now for
the length of my
cars.
finger was dry all the way down.
Okay, it's been the
I
cold,
thought
I
those
guess.
things are
I
going to
hate
die,
intersections.
and then they'll look really
I had the
good.
mums in there and took those out.
They should be dead. They're out in front of it.
Dead place?
With the hearse parking place.
There was no hearse parking.
Yeah, hers is only at Halloween time.
Yes.
Even
Can you give
though,
me like one more second?
even though today I,
Tony too.
If I take this hat off, my hair will look
even though
like got
today I
stuck
made
in
arrangements
my-
with Costco to, we're making up a cake and I'm gonna run
Yes,
me and my
sir.
hearse out for 30th, 40th, 50th, 60th, 70th birthday party. So I show up with a cake and balloons, and it's gonna be black, you know, and everything, black roses and everything else. I think there's something else to do with that thing.
Your sugar
Yeah,
cake,
chili.
bars,
And everybody
That's
got
right.
along. I couldn't believe it.
Just the way I like it.
And then, you know, what you need
Well,
is,
we didn't cook.
when you
It was
open up
my
the
sister-in-law
door,
that did
is
it.
right there's the
She
paddle.
put on a show, that's it. Yeah.
Good idea.
There we go.
Oh, no.
Very nice.
That would be funny.
Did they have 28 chairs?
I had major hat hair, sorry.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Always bring your own chair.
Bring your own hair?
Chair.
Yes, I'm good to go. I realize I have more hair than all of you guys, so.
Pete.
Thank you for your-
Ready to go whenever
Okay,
you
not
are.
body hair, not body hair. No, I don't have more body hair, sorry.
Okay, that's the show on the road.
Is it a
Planning
show?
Commission meeting for, thank you. No, Planning Commission meeting for November 30th,
No comment, no
2015
comment.
is called to order.
Call the roll when you're.
We're calling the roll for,
Call the
for
roll.
what?
Do we do that?
No, we don't call.
All right.
We're not
Never
we're not
mind.
the city commission.
Fourth grade?
When the roll is called up yonder.
Do we all raise our hand and go here or present? Oh, present. Wasn't it present or was it here? I can't remember what they did
I
back
know
then.
Commissioner Espy can't make it, so.
Yes,
We
I
understand.
saw his email.
Yeah.
Okay, so first item on our agenda is continuance, zone change amendment of comprehensive plan, master plan amendment CP 1502 and PZ 1502. Do I need to read the script?
Not tonight.
Is there anybody here to testify on those matters?
Is there anybody here
I
that
just
wants?
came to see what was happening. I'm part of the Trillium Park Estates Homeowners Association.
We have to
I
continue.
read it and I saw that it was continued, but I just wanted to make sure it was continued. So if it is, then I'm out of here.
I move to continue.
Wait. We,
No.
isn't there?
Actually, I think
an
we
explanation?
have a commission report from
Yes.
No.
Mr. Tony.
Thank you, Chair Cato. Evening, Commissioners. We are requesting a continuance of the Providence Willamette Falls Medical Center zone change and comprehensive plan amendment to the date certain of January 11th, 2015. In our noticing, we failed to notice Department of Land Conservation and Development as well as Metro on the comp plan amendment component of this application, so we did send out a renotice with a new hearing date. So we would recommend that if anyone wishes to testify tonight, that you do take public testimony, and then we continue the hearing to the date certain of January 11th, 2016. That concludes my report.
January 11th, okay.
I have a question for staff. I had asked a question. I think Laura did more than adequately answer it, but one of the things I asked in the email when I was asking about the tree ordinance was the staff report going to be amended to address the criteria,
The
comprehensive plan criteria?
state, I think
Ours, the state,
right. I
all
think
of it was raised at the meeting, and I think she said in her email that the answer was yes.
preparing a supplemental memo
Okay.
to try to address
Perfect.
the issues raised.
Just wanted to get that on the record for the benefit of the public.
Okay, so we have a request for continuance. We have a motion.
Question.
Do we have any public testimony?
Yes, we may.
No. Yes? No? Good.
I'll second the motion.
No, I'm just,
I think somebody seconded already.
We have a second, and who did the motion?
I'll be the first. I move that we continue this till the date certain, January
You sound
11th,
so coordinated today.
2016.
So we got a second before the first. That's good.
Second.
Well, I started it.
I'll
I got
second.
aborted.
Whatever.
I was going to make
Okay.
this happen fast.
That's right.
Home before the end of Jeopardy.
No, Charlie
Commissioner
Brown
Guile?
Christmas is on tonight.
count on
Didn't you
that.
know that?
Oh, I'm going to call the vote. Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Chair Kidwell?
Aye.
Motion passes.
And that staff report, of course, will be available 7 days prior to the meeting?
Correct.
All right.
Like it's legally required to be.
I know. I was
See the way
just,
that works.
I was
During the
just
National
saying it
Football
for the
Championship
public.
game.
So it's January the 11th, right?
Yep.
Okay.
111.
All right, I got that on there.
7 p.m.
7
Now, will that
p.m.
be the same for 2B also?
To be or not to be?
To be or not to be. Well, if
We're gonna
you-
do to be
If you
here.
wait for a few minutes, you'll find out. That's the plan. So the next item on our agenda is PC 15-228, continuance for PZ 1503 and zone change PZ 1501 and comprehensive master plan amendment. And I understand we have a request for continuance on that one as well.
Is that a ditto?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Ditto.
I move that we
Public-
continue this item.
If there's anyone who'd wish to testify.
We have
Does
any-
anyone wish to testify on this? Seeing none, we have a motion to continue?
I would so move. We continue
Second.
this till January 11th,
Second it.
seconded by Mr. G.
Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Chair Kidwell?
Aye.
Motion passes.
So that ditto was same as the one before.
Metro noticing.
Now you can-
etc.
So now 2B is done and.
Yes. And now everyone can go home and watch A Charlie Brown Christmas, which is on
No.
tonight.
Okay.
Jeopardy time.
No, it's the 50th anniversary of A Charlie Brown Christmas.
Next item on the agenda, 2C, is PC
Oh, God, they're turning the lights down.
15-221, revised heritage tree ordinance.
Mr. Walter, before you get started with your most eloquent presentation that is to come, are there extra copies of this for the audience?
I have one extra copy here, if folks would like to see it.
I think Mr. Nasita might be interested in that.
Okay. The one up on the website didn't have the.
Neither did ours. Anybody else want a copy
Yeah,
of
when
the
it converted
tree?
to PDF,
the
it just
tree ordinance?
disappeared.
Here's an extra.
Can I ask a question? Does this have to do with that vacant lot next to the bus barn?
No.
That was just,
Okay, then.
that was just continued.
I'll see you later.
That
Yeah.
was PC 15228, that was that one.
That was 2B.
We just continued it to January the 11th.
Okay,
January-
we'll have a meeting on that area.
Yes,
January
sir.
11th.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You're so welcome.
Have a good evening.
I do have a short PowerPoint presentation, which I want to project onto the screen behind you. See what's going on here.
Oh, this is very colorful.
I know. I really like it.
Yeah.
The
And then I'll go
orange
into
is
an
a little hard
explanation
to
on
read.
that.
But the purple's awesome.
The purple is awesome.
Okay, let's see. Looks like the lights are
It's
getting
coming on.
brighter. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Heritage Tree Code amendments to you. I'll give you a little background on this. The existing code that we have for heritage trees is 12.08.050, and within that code, The Natural Resources Committee is given the direction to recommend for adoption to the City Commission criteria to be used for determining when a tree qualifies for designation as a heritage tree, and to recommend a process to be used in reviewing and designating heritage tree nominations by citizens or by the committee itself. And if a tree is nominated on private property, the permission of that property owner is required. And this is in the existing code. It also states that the process and criteria adopted by the City Commission would be used, and they would be approved by the City Commission by resolution. And finally, to make recommendations for tree maintenance and to maintain a listing of all designated heritage trees. So the history of this process has started some time ago. Back in 2012 through October 2013, the Natural Resources Committee worked on revisions to the code to further refine the criteria and process. There was a work session with the Planning Commission on December 2014. To date, under the current code, 5 trees and 1 grove have been formally designated.
That's why I didn't
And
remember.
there are 4 tree designations on our website, and we need to add the 5th, but the 4 that have been designated to date are shown here. They're all on private lots, so they required owner consent, and they include a ponderosa pine, a white oak, a Douglas fir, and a sugar maple. Some of these designations are on the properties where historic homes are located, and some of them are not. The most recent designation, which is not shown here, is on a lot off of Pleasant Avenue, Malala Avenue, which the Soil and Water Conservation District owns, and they submitted the nomination, and it was agreed to fairly recently. So we need to
That's those
update.
3 large trees on, I know which
Oh, it was
corner.
just one of them.
One.
Yeah, it's a white oak.
What about
on
the other
that
2
one.
big trees?
The other 2, they decided not to go ahead and nominate for the designation based on their board decision. So their board decided to go ahead with it. Yeah. And also, the Heritage Grove designation applies to Waterboard Park. Was designated as a Heritage Grove on October 2nd, 2013 by the City Commission. So what do the revisions consist of? Basically, they clarify the roles of staff, the Natural Resources Committee, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and the City Commission in the process. It also clarifies owner consent, depending on whether the nomination occurs on private land, on city right-of-way, on other city property that is not right-of-way, for example, in a storm pond or a park, and also on public property or right-of-way that is not under the city's jurisdiction, such as on county-owned property or Department of Transportation property. And in those cases, the consent of the applicable jurisdiction would be required under these code revisions.
So can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
I understand the need for advisory, but I think that local governments have a moral and fiduciary responsibility to be held to a higher standard. And if there are significant trees, why would we not want to strongly encourage local governments, whoever they may be, state government, to do the right thing? Because how do we have an ordinance when we have local governments who are not responding, who are not basically standing up and saying, yes, we believe in this, and we're going to follow the ordinances?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will point out that the intent of this code is not to act as a comprehensive tree ordinance. The idea was that this is a code for designation of individual trees on private or public property through a sort of a consensual process. rather than as a separate land use or affecting ordinance or tree ordinance, which is something that a lot of people have expressed an interest in, but which would require a significant amount of public input and code revision. The process that we're outlining here is essentially tweaking what was initially discussed in the first Heritage Tree Code. But what I think what you're describing is something larger.
Yeah, I think you're
yeah,
aware that Commissioner Espy and I have expressed
Yeah.
extreme frustration over the, my words, indiscriminate removal of very large trees that we've seen over the last few years, where if there was some conscious effort, we could have looked at how to maintain those or preserve them. I mean, again, we don't have very many sequoias in this city, and we've lost one on South End Road already that was of significant diameter. So I'm just throwing it out there. It's just kind of, it's a little bit frustrating.
There's been a lot of discussion about that.
I don't want us to end up in the
Yeah.
papers like City of Portland has had happened.
We've also clarified the process for final designation and legal protection under those circumstances, bearing in mind that the City Commission is the decision maker and that each situation is unique. We've also formatted and numbered the code for readability. And I apologize for not being able to provide you with the exact red lines on the when we converted the Word document into PDF automatically. It got rid of all the track changes on the website. So the track changes version that we have is very hard to follow because there were several Natural Resources Committee meetings at which all of these changes were discussed and various versions put forward at each meeting. So if it appears unintelligible, I apologize for that. But I will go over what those changes are in my PowerPoint here.
Well, a lot of them look like they're mainly formatting, which is fairly easy to read, and then where there are comments, you know, obviously I can tell you're PW, and
Yeah.
there's, I don't know what M, is that, I see an M8, and there's a comment from Brian,
Several from Brian.
there's an ES comment. But most, like I said, looks like just glancing at it, most of them are formatting changes, which
Right.
it'll track those too, which is okay. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
some of
all
our
right.
members were using their own computers to make revisions, and so if it was somebody in their household was listed as a commenter sometimes, so it may not tie back to the actual committee member. But all these comments that you're reading in the sidebar are either by staff or the city attorney or by a Natural Resources Committee member. So out of that process, the code was separated into the following main sections. The first section being the nomination process, which includes general procedures, a section on the consent of the owner or jurisdiction, and nomination submittal requirements. The next section is the review process section, and this includes a completeness review by staff, similar to a land use application. Then it would go to, the nomination would be going to the Natural Resources Committee for review and a recommendation within 60 days, with notification to the public, to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, if applicable, and to the Neighborhood Association Chair, within which the nomination occurs. And if the nomination occurs for a right-of-way tree, which is a tree either in a street or an alleyway, notification to an abutting property owner would also be given, since under the code the abutting property owner is the responsible party for maintenance and care of that tree. And that would be a factor in the City Commission's subsequent decision. City Commission decision follows that with notice as per the parties I mentioned. And then a designation, which includes either protection by a private restrictive covenant, or if on public property, an official listing, or any other approved legal document that the City Commission feels is necessary to protect that tree in perpetuity. One of the main sections that the Natural Resources Committee worked on was the criteria sections. And they ultimately ended up having two sections of criteria. The first section is the heritage criteria, and this is where we look at the tree and how it represents history or heritage for Oregon City. And at least one of these criteria must be met. First one is that the tree or stand of trees is associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad pattern of Oregon City's history, or the tree or stand is associated with the life of a person or group of historic significance to Oregon City, or the tree or stand represents a significant and distinguishable presence, or the tree has or stand has age, size, or species significance, horticultural or ecological, which contributes to Oregon City's heritage status. So there's a lot of discussion that went into each one of these criteria.
Do you have any examples of how, let's say, criteria 1, 2, 3, and 4 could be met with, maybe you have off the top of your head, you know about,
Yeah.
that you remember from the other
sure.
nominations?
The Ainsworth Ponderosa Pine, a lot of that was associated with the House and Gardens and Captain Ainsworth and that sort of thing.
And how were they able to document that the tree had been planted at the time the house was built, or?
Well, I couldn't go into that much detail without looking back at it. But in each case, either through the submittal of documents and notes or written testimony, they were able to tie that nomination to the heritage, and then it was up to the Natural Resources Committee to basically, through a consensus decision, make that determination. And in some cases, for example, the white oak on the Clyde Mount, Dr.
Yeah, Dr.
Mount.
Yeah,
Clyde
Dr. Mount.
The owner of the property is still there, or
Not Dr. Mount, though.
Not Dr. Mount, but the owner was able to tie that clearly back to the heritage of the house and the property. Not Dr. Mount. Yeah.
Yeah. He's
so
huh?
Very old.
Yes,
Yeah.
Dr. Mount would be very old by
He would
now.
be.
Yes.
Well, Pete, just on the criteria of size alone, you could say that the tree is significant enough not to be protected or to be protected.
You could under this section if the.
I mean, you wouldn't
if
have
they
to
felt-
trace the history, just on if it were on size alone.
Technically, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what Denise was talking about on that site.
Although there is it says which contributes to Oregon City's heritage status, so.
I mean, it's an or,
Yeah.
but, I think, if you can, like on number 1, if you're able to document that tree was a small tree at the time, let's just say Dr. Mount's house was built, which was built in the 20s, yeah, I mean, that's a direct tie-in. He may have planted it there. I've
Right.
never asked Phyllis whether he actually did, but that tree has obviously been there a really long time. But the Ainsworth house, yeah, they have significant stands, but that was a huge property at one time. Sure. Way before it got down to the size it is now. I mean, and there would have been a lot of trees, on that property. But again, those are remnant. And then those locusts that are there, Mrs. Powers planted those. She kind of did that all over town.
So the next set of criteria are the site and condition criteria, and all three must be met. A certified arborist, forester, or ecologist must determine in a written report that this tree or stand of trees is not irreparably damaged or diseased or hazardous or unsafe, or the applicant is willing to have that tree or stand treated by a professional to alleviate that. Second is that the tree is not an invasive species, and the third is that it's located on property that is either owned by a jurisdiction that consents to the nomination or by an owner that consents to the nomination and who agrees to whatever protective covenant is required for permanent protection in that case.
So in this case, Damon would not be able to keep his very large butterfly bush or his, what's the newest one that's out there that you see everywhere? It's the, is it the Chinese elm? It's that really, when you try to pull it up, it just smells really bad. It's just not a great tree.
I think my stand of Arborvitae is significant.
I think they're classified as a bush, not a tree. Now,
I
if
don't
you
know, they get big enough.
if you were in the Midwest, they grow into trees, but not out here.
I'm working on it.
Pete,
Well, we'll
how much-
nominate them. We'll see what happens.
How much does the written report typically cost?
Well, it kind of depends on what they're trying to document. If they're trying to document just hazard, it might be cheaper, but anywhere from a few $100s to several
Tree
thousand.
of heaven. They're horrible.
Doesn't this represent an obstacle to the whole process? I mean, once a property owner is going to agree to
Used to
spend a
be one
couple
in,
$1,000s out of his pocket
until it
Mm.
rotted from
for,
the
for,
inside.
for this, it doesn't make sense to me.
Mhm. Well,
It
We
doesn't
have the,
encourage
Catalpa on
the
Fifth Avenue, Fifth Street, too.
identification of a heritage tree on any property. I mean, why doesn't the city participate in this?
Well, the city could assist in, what the city does is basically process this application.
At the expense of the owner?
Yeah. It's hard to know what other assistance would a property owner would request. Obviously, people would like help with maintenance, technical and otherwise, and that sort of thing. But I think what we're getting into here is an area where this is essentially a voluntary process. So if somebody wants to designate a tree badly enough and protect it permanently, then this is what brings it out into the open and makes people aware of what the protection actually means.
In relation to
Yeah.
Bob's question, is there any benefit to having it designated for that private property owner?
Well, of the 5 that have been designated, I think it's just the peace of mind that comes with having that tree, knowing that tree will be protected to the maximum extent that it can be under the code.
Well,
But,
there's-
you know, to that
there's value.
point, on page 5 of the marked up ordinance that you gave us, I find it appropriate that the comment by ES10 says, I suspect a lot of property owners faced with the real prospect of limitations on land use will get cold feet and not complete the process. I suggest that the landowner consent either include the covenants ready for signature or disclosure by the landowner, get specific disclosure that covenants are the outcome. Really, what is the incentive for a landowner to go through all of this?
Yeah. I know.
And I think that goes to exactly what Bob and Tom are saying, is that if there's no incentive for them to go through the process, and it's going to cost a lot of money out of their pocket, the path of least resistance is just not to do it.
They could just go and record their own covenant.
Exactly.
Yeah, they could.
Maybe we should get a cool plaque.
They could call it their private heritage tree.
Yeah, I mean, in this
The
case,
alternative.
the code either serves as a code or it could potentially serve as a set of policies for staff to follow when reviewing nominations.
Right.
You know, it's a very detailed process that's been outlined here. I
Well,
don't disagree with you. Yeah.
You know, this kind of started years ago. And the thing that the discussion I recall having at that point was, this needs to be in place, and then the follow-on to that needs to be some sort of natural resources grant program where, if somebody submits a tree and it's approved, they can get half their money back. Or if they want it preserved but they can't afford, then the arborist inoculations that they could apply in, like a matching
Metro
program or
enhancement
something
grant.
like that. Yeah, but that was kind of the second half of this that would get private landowners to step up. It's like, I love my tree, but I can't protect it, so it's either cut it down or, maybe I can get something from the city to save it, kind of thing. So
Yeah, I incentives are always better than sticks, but I mean, I think that having this is a good first step, because I think the way a lot of people, and I'll include myself in that, look at things like trees or historic properties, we're really just temporary caretakers. We technically own it for the time that we own it, but then after that, and people do have some desire to have something go on beyond their, occupancy. I mean, there are a number of houses in the McLaughlin neighborhood that are now over 100 years old. I mean, now that might not sound like a lot in terms of the East Coast, but in terms of the West Coast, that's pretty awesome. And we have a large number of those where people, I think it has a lot to do with pride, or you just want to, you're a caretaker. That's kind of how you look at it. And it doesn't always have to be, what's in it for me, but I think you're right in the fact that we could try to make it easier. Now, is there a fee to apply for this?
No.
Or is the only fee that they have to do is basically contact the arborist and blah, 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 and that would be some cost? But,
Right.
we're really trying, I think in that way, we're incentivizing that. It's the same thing that we do with the Landmarks Commission. We don't charge super lot of fees for, people wanting to make alterations. Now, if they want to do something really bad, yeah, we can charge them a lot. But, so, I mean, I think that just in the last 6 months and just reading through all the documentation about the issues with trees in the city of Portland, and I just think that they add a lot of value to property. I mean, they provide, shade and cooling, and then there's the, the whole thing with sucking the bad stuff out of the air, and, I mean, there's just so many reasons why you would want to have trees. And
hide your neighbor's ugly house.
yeah, hide your neighbor's ugly house, and
That's what arborvitaes are.
And a
Yeah.
lot of those sort of purpose and intent statements are already
Yeah.
in the code,
Yeah.
but they're not explicit in this particular section yet. So,
yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
It'd be, like I said, this was put in as a voluntary measure on behalf of property owners. I know it's not a lot,
it's
but
something.
in terms of, we don't charge a fee. Pete, we cover the recording fee for the applicant. You do get a plaque. It's the beginning of a program.
It's
The
like
city
the
doesn't
plaque is
have
totally
a
worth
city
it.
arborist. We don't have an
A forestry,
urban
yeah,
forestry program. We don't have a department that deals with that. So this was kind of that first step in trying to address some of the concerns we were hearing from the commission and the citizens about trees. We, not to go off, but, as you recall, we greatly increased the tree mitigation requirements without doing a formal citywide private property tree code. So it's always been kind of, how far can we go? Because there hasn't been interest in a citywide private property tree permitting process or removal.
Well, that's what I was saying when this conversation started. It was, if we wanted to do anything, we have to have something in place to measure against and to evaluate, rather than just having everybody come in willy-nilly and saying, I like my, my pine tree and my this and my that, and it's, so you've got, it's in there. There isn't necessarily anything for, Joe Private Citizen.
Oh, you
or
get a
Jane.
cool plaque.
Sure, but, there's a lot of cul-de-sacs and places where that plaque wouldn't be, like, there would be no visible plaque on my property at all, because,
Well, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be visible.
well, I understand, but so the plaque wouldn't be much incentive. But there's something there, and so now growth can come from it. I mean, it's the sapling, and now let's let it grow and
Which
do
I
what
think
we can
we've
for
been, like I said, making small steps towards that with code changes. This is our third year Tree City USA designation.
Yeah, how did we get that if we don't have a tree ordinance?
We do.
Well,
They
I
have a
mean,
public tree ordinance.
that's what that's.
Yeah.
I've seen like Oswego's, and they're a tree city, and they're on the high tier there.
And we've also contracted with Friends of Trees for the first plantings in neighborhoods. So it's trying to make those steps with the education opportunity.
Well, actually, it's probably the third. We worked with them several years ago to do tree planting in McLaughlin, so this is our second round with them. So it's probably the fourth or fifth round that they've been in our community doing that.
I have a question, and I'm not sure if it applies here, but and I'll try to phrase it right. I know earlier this year we were looking at a property that was going to do build a home, senior citizen home there. There was a large tree there, I think, that you were interested in.
That was the one I was talking about on
Okay.
South End Road.
So what I was wondering is, so let's say we do an annexation and some property comes in where there are some large trees that some people are concerned about, but that's private property coming in for annexation, and then the developer says, no, that's in the way of the construction. I mean, is there anything in here that applies to something where some citizens believe that when it comes in that should not be cut down or something?
This is voluntary.
Terry, yeah,
Totally
it-
voluntary.
It doesn't help us in that regard.
That's what Tony was saying. We don't
Sorry.
have a tree ordinance that is mandatory
Okay.
at this point that tells people what you can and can't do with your trees.
So even an annexation, I had once heard that with annexations, that you could not cut down trees within 5 years of applying for annexation. And maybe that was another city, or they talked about possibly doing it here. And that-
we were looking at some of those issues.
Were you okay?
Yeah.
Because I thought so.
Because we were having issues with guys clear cutting.
Cutting before
putting
they-
in-
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
getting at. Could somebody clear cut? It has nothing to do with this at all. They can just do it and then say, come to us for applying for development.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to understand.
We have said off on the record that when we've known about the property having a lot of trees, we've said, please do not cut everything down because we will not be very happy with you.
But they sometimes do it before they even come to us.
We haven't had anybody do it lately, I can tell
'Cause
you
I've
that.
seen it going on
Yeah.
in my area.
Yeah.
Because they don't enjoy public chastisement.
Yeah.
Well, I think, what we run into a little bit here too is, like on Fair Road years ago, we had that development, and it was in timber.
Mhm.
It was an investment to be logged.
Yeah, it was a crop.
That was mismanaged over the years.
Yeah, it
So-
was
so we run into that
overgrown,
as well,
yeah.
But they'll come in and go, hey, I've had this in timber deferment for the last 30, 40, whatever years, or
We had the recent one with the tree farm.
the tree,
Farm,
Christmas
yeah,
tree.
yeah, it was Christmas trees. We didn't have any
You
objection
Tony.
to that.
Address that when it was a retail.
Yeah, it's a
versus,
crop.
The reason I asked this, it came up in the Park Place area at one point about 2 years ago because several people heard chainsaws going all summer long and trees were being felled, and they called me and I said, I don't know, call the city. They called the city, they called the county, they called the state, they called everybody, and they said, well, if it's on private property, they can cut it, but the state was concerned that they were cutting down too many in a certain area, so
Being an
that's why.
erosion issue, yeah.
Totally.
Melody just signed me to talk into your microphone, so.
So,
So-
Pete, do you have anything else to add to your presentation?
A couple more slides here.
Okay.
So what does protection mean? We either record this restrictive covenant, which spells out in detail what the conditions.
Are you referring to page 6?
No, I'm talking to the slideshow here.
Okay, well, I'm trying to follow along in what you've given us.
Okay.
So I know what I'm kind of looking at here.
Yeah, well, when the tree is designated, the city will have a restrictive covenant recorded on the property. It runs with the land. And that covenant specifies that in order to remove a heritage tree or stand, the owner or the city or whatever entity agreed to it, must demonstrate that the burden imposed on the owner or the city by the continued presence of the tree outweighs the public benefit provided by the tree, and a certified arborist report documenting any poor health or hazard must be approved by the city, and mitigation is required pursuant to the code if the tree is removed.
You find that?
Yeah. It should say they will be whipped within an inch of the
Also,
line.
with the review of the tree code, the Natural Resources Committee also provided some recommendations for definition revisions as well. So the term grove was discussed at length, and the idea of replacing the term grove with the term stand had consensus, and subsequently they adopted they approved a new definition for a tree stand. Not necessarily a heritage tree, but any tree stand would mean a stand of 3 or more trees which together create a mutual canopy continuous over 80 or more % of the area within the boundaries of the stand. There are other definitions that they discussed as well. The current definition of a heritage tree or grove is given here, and that stated that a 2 or more heritage trees separated by no more than 20 feet would be termed a heritage grove. And the revision would be 2 or more trees that have been designated by the city subsequent to this code section as having unique importance would be a heritage tree grove.
Is that based on
Stand.
Webster's, or
No.
what was the basis of the
Well,
definition?
there was, they looked at Webster's definitions, but they also looked at, botanical definitions as well. And after some discussion, this is the definition that they all agreed to.
I just looked up grove. It says according to Webster's, it's a small group of trees.
Right.
Whatever that means. Yeah.
There was a lot of debate about this, and a lot of this was driven by the Waterboard Park nomination in
Right.
the entire area. And what do you get?
What's the definition of a stand?
That large.
Well, that could be a
A
grove.
heritage stand or just a stand?
Just a stand of
Right
trees.
here.
Oh, is your mic on, Tony? Yeah.
First comment kind of goes over to grove and stand and all that. I like stand better than grove because I always had a problem with 2 trees is a grove. It's just that may be technically correct, but culturally correct, or what I was brought up to believe.
Picky,
but
picky,
stand,
picky.
yeah, stands 2, 3, 4, 5 trees. Maybe they're in a row. Maybe they're in a circle. Who knows? But
And the canopy is also relevant in this situation as well.
yeah, the question I have is canopy at what time of year?
Mhm.
Because if they're deciduous, so you have a completely different canopy than.
Yeah. Well,
Well, in my judgment, until the city gets serious about a tree ordinance and what to do, and how to protect trees, this to me is just a exercise in, I won't say futility, but it's close to it. And when I say commitment, I'm talking about taking the burden of financial commitment off the property owner and adopting a comprehensive tree ordinance which protects trees, both in subdivisions on a private property, and includes a financial liability for people that go out and cut down trees indiscriminately, and we've seen it as planners every day in subdivisions. They get their subdivision approved, and prior to the platting, they go out there and they cut down trees indiscriminately. And we've talked about this ad infinitum since I've been a planner, and nobody seems to really want to get serious about it. Technically, we can do these things, but from a political point of view, it's up to the elected official to establish a commitment. They're either going to do it or they're not. It's got nothing to do with planning. We know how to protect trees from a standpoint of planning and environmental protection, but politically, we just haven't got there yet.
right.
Yeah, but I would counter that this is a way to find out what the political will of the people are. If you're going to spend the public's money and not fix a pothole but keep a pine tree, then this, if there's a whole bunch of heritage tree applications coming in, then that shows that there is some will of the citizenship rather than, because I think if right now our budget is such that if you protect a pine, you leave a pothole, you don't repair 20 feet of water main, you don't, and I agree, but we also can't put a tree fee down on anything right now because it's the quickest way to change the 5 people that sit up here.
I don't understand
So-
what you mean by a tree fee.
Well, the current budget is such that you have to take away to give. And
Take away what?
if you're going to put
From other-
the money forward to have an arborist on call who will maintain the heritage trees and lawyers who will sue people for tearing down their own trees, that costs money.
Yeah, I
So
understand.
that
Okay.
money's got to come from somewhere.
And we're asking the private property owner to come forth with his own money to qualify. And how
But what you're saying is, what you said is, this doesn't mean anything unless we come forward with the money for that private property owner. And if we're going to come forward with that money, it has to come out of some other pot. That means no water, no sewer, no pothole repair, libraries with fewer books, whatever that may be. That's where the money would have to come from. Or we would have to add a tree fee, some additional tax to the citizens, which is, again, like I said, a political situation. So what this particular ordinance does is test the water to see if there's even any interest. We've got 5 trees in 5 years and 1 grove, which is good. I mean, it's a good start because there was a lot of confusion the first couple of years, so I'd really say there's 5 in 3. And in 3 or 4 more years, if it's 10 or 20 or 30 and a couple more groves, then it shows that there is an interest out there, that there's a reason for a politician to stick their neck out and mess with the budget and or go out to the
This is
people
not
for an
fair.
issue. So that, I think, is what's good about this, is it's infinitely better than nothing.
I'm
and
not
a
saying it's not
start.
good, Damon. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't think we ought to fool ourselves and say it's complete.
Oh, no.
Well,
Nobody is.
I think the thing you need to keep in perspective here is the intent of this. This is not intended to be a comprehensive tree ordinance. This is specifically for designation of heritage trees. It's already an ordinance. This is not new. This is something that's already in place. And what the Natural Resource Committee has done over the last year is to clean up the language because there was a lot of ambiguity and confusion, and I think the confusion had deterred a lot of people because they didn't understand what it was about. So I think the benefit of going forward with this is not necessarily instead of or in place of a tree ordinance. This is cleaning up the language of what we have, and maybe it's another step in the direction that we want to go. And I think Damon's idea that maybe there is a fund available to assist a property owner in need for a portion of the cost of designating those trees. But this is not a instead of. This is taking what we already have now and just cleaning it up so it's more useful.
Well, I guess I agree with both people, but I want to suggest to you, my friend Damon, is that the city may be using small potholes as traffic calming devices, and so we don't want to get rid of them, and we'd rather have our water line replaced, because knowing that pothole is there and identified will slow traffic down, which is a goal of the Transportation Advisory Committee, and we should, incentivize that committee to use that as a type of facility.
If that's the case, I got one of the safest streets in the city.
You probably do. But I was just looking up, and this says that a forest stand is a continuous community of trees sufficiently uniform in composition, structure, age, and size class distribution, and you'll love this, spatial arrangement, site quality, condition, or location to distinguish it from adjacent tree communities. That's a really long version of it, but yeah, a group of trees that basically have similar characteristics. That's what they consider a stand of
I
trees.
kind of like the cool trees that are close together definition.
That's a good definition.
Can't stand
Easy.
that definition.
Okay, so Pete, are you done with your presentation?
Yeah, I just want to mention that, there's some code references, numerical and otherwise, which we would clean up if this is ultimately adopted and make it match, our numbering and things like that. So that's what I
Okay.
have to issue. Yeah.
So I would assume if there's people here that would like to speak to this issue, that we would take public testimony at this time?
I actually have one more question. Could you explain what the notice requirement is?
Well, there's essentially a general public notice which would be consisting of putting our agenda out the way we do for city commission 1 week prior.
So a
to
meeting
the-
notice?
To a meeting, yeah, not a hearing notice per se, but a meeting notice. And then providing those specific notifications that are actually spelled out in this code section.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah.
trying to find that.
Oh, okay.
Right here,
You mean
Under,
item 4.
bottom of 4?
That's everything.
in the review process, middle and bottom of page 4.
Okay, what about
we talk about,
so the notice is nothing more than the posting of the agenda?
well, no.
Or are you putting a notice in the paper?
For the Natural Resources Committee review, we provide regular notice to the public, applicant, and property owner. Depending on the situation, we would provide notice to Parks and Rec Advisory Committee via email. We would not put these in the newspaper. We're basically using what we already use for notice to our CIC and neighborhood association and
It
committees of
wouldn't
that
be
nature.
like the blue land use sign in front of the tree or anything like that.
We didn't really talk about
It's not
that kind of
really land
notice.
use
no.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
like we put for those.
Yeah. Seems to me
Okay.
that's a little bit meager.
The impacted people are the ones who are going to have to take care of it. and
Well, I know, but
they-
I'm
They
just-
definitely get noticed.
I'm just
so.
thinking if I hadn't, well, I mean, let's just say I'm wandering by the notice board here in City Hall, and I just happen to glance at the agenda, and I'm not an affected party, but that would be the only way I'd find out about it. Which, again, that's sort of random and,
Does that impact you, though?
it doesn't matter. I'm a citizen of the city of Oregon City. That's why I was asking. I said, what kind of notice are we using
But if it's
to...
on private property,
It- Land use actions are on private property, but we still know about those.
I would think after the fact, like having a system where you talked about the new heritage tree would be another piece of adding value.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, just want to know. Don't forget to fill out your little form.
Okay, so let's move taking public testimony.
James Nacita, Oregon City. Couple of comments on this. First, the addition of a date certain for review is very good. That was, I think, the biggest issue with the old version, that there was no schedule for reviewing, and an application could just languish for a long time. In fact, the Waterboard Park application did languish for quite some time.
So you're referring to the bottom of page 3. So we want to follow along with it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm actually talking about section 2 on page 4. Within 60 days of deeming
right.
the application complete, the
it.
development director shall forward it onto the NRC. Second, I think Commissioner Mahoney's point is very, very well taken, in particularly in regards to stands as opposed to individual trees. And I think that could be a very strong disincentive for stands to be nominated, because they will be more expensive to get an arborist to review. I would like to suggest that the commission consider kind of like a burden shifting language for that particular provision, and I think that's on page 6. Especially in the case of a stand, I mean, just going back, I think a lot of this came out of the Waterboard Park issue. A stand, more likely than not, is going to be on public property, and even if it's on private property, I don't know where the opposition would be except from the city. And I would suggest consideration of shifting that burden onto the city. If instead of forcing the applicant to prove that something is healthy, I would shift the burden to the city to prove through an arborist report that it's unhealthy, because the city in particular is much more able to bear that cost should it want to challenge a stand or even an individual tree application. And the last point I have, two more points. One is, no, actually a couple more points. I'm not sure, and I think this goes back to the current code. I wasn't sure then, and I'm not sure now, why some of this ordinance is in Chapter 12 and some of it's in Chapter 17. In particular, enforcement and definitions. If this is really supposed to be standalone and it's not supposed to be part of the zoning ordinance, I think all of it should be taken out of the zoning ordinance and put into Chapter 12. And I think that merits a discussion. Finally, or next, penalties and enforcement. I don't know, and I think this, because it may be in Chapter 17, what is the penalties for gratuitous cutting down of heritage trees in Heritage Grove? But I think we should consider some either substantial civil penalties or even criminal penalties. And getting back to Waterboard Park, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that there was a mass tree cutting at the upper end of Waterboard Park this spring. A couple of us went and hiked through that area. A good chunk of those trees were quite obviously of the species and size that they would fall under the definition of the heritage tree or grove, and therefore would have been protected by the code or by the adoption of Waterboard Park as a heritage grove.
Well, I think Waterboard Park, by its nature, is a charter park and is protected already, so that's where...
There's no criminal penalties in the charter for cutting down trees in a natural area. The natural parks provision of the charter only prohibits the commission, is the words.
Right.
So I don't know if there were somehow staff had issued a permit to whoever the individual was,
No, there was no permit.
who cut those trees down, then they violated the right to vote. But there's no criminal penalties for that mass slaughter of trees in that natural as a natural park in the charter. There's just no penalties.
Except for
It's
destruction of
trespass.
public property.
Well, there's, timber
it's
trespass and all those
trespass
stuff.
and-
However, that does go to the point is, for something as gratuitous as that was, there should be some liability for that under the Heritage Grove ordinance if those
So
were in fact
do you have a
Heritage Grove.
suggestion for, I mean,
Well, my next,
we could recommend that there be some sort of
Yeah, I was going to
civil
recommend, I was going to ask for a continuance on this because, this came out right around Thanksgiving and
well,
the CIC and Neighborhood
We just got the
Association.
corrected copy tonight, so.
Commissioner Espy already asked me to ask that
okay.
question,
So,
so.
but I think that does need a discussion.
Yeah.
And let's see, I think that's all the comments I had.
Yeah, and what I know of is there's an ongoing investigation, and several individuals are trying to get to the bottom of what that investigation was and is on the tree removal. They were removed in this ordinance. It says you can't take down a heritage tree for view because your view is obstructed or some other ridiculous reason, and these trees were removed allegedly for a view.
The only, I guess, general comment about is the shifting the burden issue would be the concern that someone would designate a stand in order to shift the burden to the public, but he's really only after one tree. So, like, he's got a couple of pines and a white oak all within, his front yard, and he says, "Oh, I want to designate this stand. So, city, pay for the arborist report." "Oh, the arborist says the pines aren't, but the white oak is." "Okay, well, I have the report already." That would be my one concern with that. I do understand, just generally you're saying it should be the whole burden, whether it's 1 or 9 or a million trees. But again, I think we get to the point of at what point do we lose something else, some other city service that, but I think we in general, I think it would behoove us to push that this be adopted and that the city commission move forward with some sort of natural resources grant program to help this, just like we argued on the the sign ordinance that enforcement has no value. It has no value without enforcement. This has greater value with carrots.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Jim.
Is there anyone else that wishes to testify on this?
This won't be your last time.
The last opportunity.
Okay. So we've had a request for continuance. Do we want to
I'll make the motion.
make a motion for that?
Well, when would we be looking at for?
January 1st.
We're going to be at a party on January 1st, not here.
I move that we move it, but it depends on the date.
December 14th,
Yeah, that works.
your next hearing.
Yeah, I want to specifically make sure that Commissioner Espy has an opportunity to review the track changes. This is kind of one of his, it's in his wheelhouse, as they say.
Okay.
And I know he has concerns about it.
And the motion is to move it to December 14th.
I'll second it.
Commissioner Gao,
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe,
Aye.
Commissioner Hankin,
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney,
Aye.
Chair Tidwell.
Aye.
Now, let me ask you one more question. I know this agenda went out to various and sundry parties, but I think it would behoove us to make sure that the neighborhood associations try to get the word out, as well as the Citizen Involvement Committee and, parks, anybody else that, I think everybody in this community has an interest in this. Whether
Most
they,
neighborhood associations are
what-
meeting between now and
Yeah.
December. They,
Well, it doesn't
this-
matter. They can still get there's still a way to get the word out.
CIC should.
They're
be
meeting on
no-
the 7th.
They should be notified.
Yeah.
They're meeting on the 7th. I
Yeah.
know that for a
Yeah.
fact, so.
they just don't have meetings in the neighborhoods.
Okay.
We will.
To,
We'll have one. We have our meeting's Thursday.
Oh, okay.
So we're closed on that matter. Do we have any communications?
We did, as part of the work for the Willamette Falls Legacy Project, we've been working with Eco Northwest, looking at local funding options. We did a tour with the city commissioners to Wilsonville and Lake Oswego and met with their economic development departments, mainly focusing on Villebois and the Coffee Creek urban renewal areas down in Wilsonville. So it was just good to hear, especially with Villebois, their use of the urban renewal agency as well as other funding options in trying to implement that development out there. Now, a significant development had impacts on I-5, Wilsonville Road, as well as going through the recession and the downturn in housing that they went through. So It was a really good experience to go meet with their economic development folks, their mayor, and do a tour of those sites. Then in Lake Oswego, met with their city manager and their economic development director, focusing on the Weiser blocks and then Millennium Park and some of the funding tools that they used in those areas when we start to consider the options that are available to us as a local jurisdiction to bring funds as part of a public-private infrastructure project. Lake Oswego was interesting as well, looking at the parking structures that were put in by Millennial Park on A Street there, as well as the parking structure that's going in as part of the Weiser block development, and some of the creative ways they looked and worked with the private property owner to fund and have public use of those parking structures. That's the update that I have.
So what is, I know she's not here, but have you heard anything about how we're now into November the 30th, so we've had basically 29 days or 30 days counting tonight of implementation of the new sign code, and I've noticed driving around town, some places have come into full compliance, and there's a few stragglers, I would say, that need some, hello, did you know you're not supposed to have this? Thank you so much, conversations.
So we have gone out and contacted owners, letting them know about the process, what the process is. So we have quite a few A-frames have come in over the last 30 days, some to go into effect. So we continue to work with property owners and trying to bring them into compliance with that. The one feedback we did get is actually from for Clackamas County for their jurors. We had that time in the morning where you couldn't have signs out prior to, and so they have jurors showing up before then, and we still want to have an A-frame out there to point jurors to the door.
Yeah, I saw it this afternoon when I was down there.
We're trying to figure out what to do with that one. But that's the one feedback we've gotten so far.
When I was in West Lynn in the Parks Department, it was funny that maybe it was planning picked up all the signs from the parks about all the upcoming events, and even the city couldn't put out signs. They would pick them up and put them down in the basement, and Parks and Rec couldn't put them out.
Well, they have to follow the rules too. That's how it works.
I just figured city government, that's an exception. I don't know.
So I have a question. Maybe either one of you can answer it. So we have a shopping center that's located on Malala Avenue, and we have tenants that are further into the shopping center, but we have signs sitting out on the public right-of-way that are not anywhere near their shops. Half the time they're laying in the landscaping. So what is the regulation about that?
There's a limitation to the number of signs that you can have on your property. So if they're in the landscaped area, they're probably outside of the public right-of-way. And so remember, we broadened the number of sign types to include A-frames on private property. I would have to look into it more specifically.
I'll give you an example of one. It's right at the corner where U.S. Bank is at Beaver Creek and Malala, and it's there's a sign sitting there for Jimmy John's, and they are, quite a ways from that intersection. And then there's
So you're talking about distance.
Well, not so much distance, but it's locational. And I was trying to figure out, okay, is that legal or is that not legal? And there's a retail establishment that has one there. They also have one on Warner Milne, trying to get the attention to their facility, their business.
Yeah, and I think, that'll, part of one of the difficulties with those larger tax lots that have multiple users is kind of just the education on what's allowed and what's not allowed. So we'll continue to work on that.
And I noticed a lot of those wavy flag things have come down. There's still a couple in that same shopping center that need to go away because now we don't allow them.
And I was told when I went and saw Laura at the planning department was that if it was there before November 1st, the wavy flags, it's still allowed. And I said, well, I had some up for Halloween, some stuff up front, but I take it down. And she said, well, if it's up by November 1st, it's allowed.
Well, it's one of those that
the wavy ones, yeah.
That looks like this.
Yes. Because as I was coming up to the planning department, I saw one for a auto place right there on
Oh,
Malone.
the corner of
And
Malala
I mentioned
and-
it to Laura, and she said those are allowed if it was in place before November 1st.
That's not my understanding, is that everything has to come into compliance by November. If it was not legal prior to then, it's not legal now. They weren't legal, period.
Right.
So why would they be allowed to stay because they were there before November 1st?
Unless I heard her wrong, because I said, well, I had some ghost ones I was going to put up. And she said, nope, it had to have been up. And I'm
Well,
going, well, mine were up. but I-
my understanding is that
I-
everything had to come into compliance.
I agree with Denise. I don't think there's any
There was-
grandfather.
no, there wasn't any.
For those.
Maybe it was by mistake, but that's what I thought I heard.
Okay.
You don't have one of
Uh,
those big things like that.
I
had
had
one, but I didn't
one
put it
thing, this is kind of a ticky-tacky little thing, but as I was reading the agenda tonight, it struck me
Uh-oh.
that item 2A and 2B, if I didn't have any outside knowledge of what those items are,
Description's a little poor.
there's no description.
We can work on that.
I mean, I think for the general public, all those numbers are pretty meaningless.
Yeah, if it was just,
And
Willamette property,
so we
old
have-
bus barn.
We
even
have
that
two
would be-
items on the agenda that are zone changes and comprehensive plan changes, and no idea what they relate to.
So you're suggesting it say blah, blah, blah for property located at blah, blah?
I think you could leave off all the numbers and put if we're stressed for space there and running out of type, if we only have so many letters to use, I'd put Willamette Falls Hospital. And I'd put property adjacent to Beaver Creek Road at,
213.
Just put old
213.
bus barn.
or what.
Yeah. Well, I think if you,
work- we'll
if you
fix
put
that.
the address,
It didn't strike me until I was reading this. I'm going, huh,
I already had.
it's a good thing I know what this is about.
I had
would be
a, I
really
had a
confused.
You and me
citizen,
both.
I had a citizen call me the day after the agenda came out and ask me what that was
Yeah.
and where they were. And I said, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
I said, it's addressed as blah, 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 and da-da-da, and they said, oh, okay.
Okay, anything else?
So, Willamette Falls Riverwalk. What is our tentative schedule? I'm assuming they're working away like little beavers?
So we're working with the state on amending the financing plan that was approved by the governor,
Okay.
governor's office, so we need to finish that negotiation. Then we will be bringing back, there'll probably be a partners meeting. I don't think we're going to get it in before Christmas, so it's going to have to be in January, where we take it back, the intergovernmental agreement between the partners for the Riverwalk budget, and essentially setting up the decision-making and management process for the next 2 years for the Riverwalk project. So once it goes to the partners, assuming that we've addressed all their concerns and red lines, then it'll go back to each of those organizations to adopt at one of their commission hearings, and then we would be able to start with the contract with Snowhead and Dialogue and Mary.
So they're just in a holding pattern right now?
Yeah, the redoing the financing plan's taking a little bit, trying to put together a 2-year budget on that project, and then just, getting the comments in on the IGA, and we just kind of ran out a little bit of time here at the holidays.
So it's not scheduled to start for at least 2 years?
No, it's going to be a two-year process, roughly.
Before it starts, before the actual construction starts.
Right, so this is the design and engineering for the
Because over the
Riverwalk.
weekend, the majority of the people in my store were from Utah, California, all over, and they were all, when's it going to start? And I'm going, I think.
Right. Yeah. So you start construction after that process. There will be some lag time in there
Okay.
for permitting and whatnot.
I just had hope in my lifetime.
Did you get penguins?
No.
Okay, if we're done, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Tony.
So just so I don't think
Pete,
that